Splendid, excellent. Welcome one and all to the Commit Happy Hour here on Friday the 25th of September at 3:30 if you're here in the UK, and whatever time it is around the world. I hope you'll be joining me for a swift pint halfway through this happy hour once again. Today we're looking at 4D and how it will be more of an improvement within construction. I've got to say that 4D has always been something that has interested me because of the planning and scheduling side. And a good planner, a good scheduler within a construction project is worth their weight in gold. And if you don't plan properly right at the very beginning, you plan to fail when you are delivering whatever you are trying to produce. So in this area of uncertainty, I think planning and 4D gives us that little bit of certainty. And as with all things, we introduce you to a panel of excellent people looking at 4D. Peter, James, Stacey, Chris, Daria, and of course your host, Stuart, who I'm going to hand over to you now to run through what we're going to be doing in the next hour. Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks very much. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to all the attendees. A little bit about Commit, who's hosting the session today. Commit, as some of you will know, has been around since 2003. We're a collaboration platform made up of owners, contractors, academia, and solution providers. And we're here to help. We have been delivering these webinars now for a number of years. We upped the frequency back in March to keep everybody engaged, and we're supporting the productivity initiative that Commit's been running, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few seconds. But what I will say is we thrive on questions. Now, whilst we've got a couple of questions or several questions that came in beforehand, we've got an opportunity to ask questions. And if we run past the hour session, we've got what we call a lock-in, where you can stay behind and ask a few more questions and get engaged. We also have, if I can just talk you through the panel there, you can raise your hand or you can type your questions in the sidebar and we'll read those out at the end or maybe during, depends on how many we get. What I will also say is that we have some poll questions, which I'm going to do at the beginning. We usually open the session with those. They're all related to today's delivery. There's no curveballs in there like we've had in the past. So please feel free to ask questions right from the start. I'm sure some of you will have tuned in to learn a little bit more about 4D and how you can apply it in your day jobs in your organization. So fire away. Talking about productivity, this is an initiative that we're all striving to improve. The COMIT community identified with the major barriers facing the industry and has developed an opportunity with its members to create enablers and value with the potential for hugely beneficial change that would lead to across industry productivity improvement and essentially a fingerprint for success. The initiative Commit to Productivity, as we've appropriately called it, will bring together, or is bringing together, owners, contractors, academics and solution providers to collaborate and seek new ways of enablement through process improvement and the ultimate demonstration projects. The aim is to reduce capital projects by up to 30% and a reduction in cycle times of 10%. These are some of the areas that we've looked at. Obviously today is in the area of planning, project interactive, plus a few other links to other areas. But we have identified major improvements in quite a lot of those areas. And I've left the door open with others because there's suggestions coming in all the time on what we should look at. At this point, I want to thank our sponsors today, O2 and Rebim. Without them, we couldn't put on these webinars. So thanks to them both for that. Now, I did mention poll questions, and what I just need to do now is bring the poll questions out. And there are no curveballs this week. We normally have a few, but let me roll out the first question, if I may. So these are multi-choice answers. The first one should launch now. Can everybody see that?
Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, I can't vote on this one, Stuart, of course, being one of the organisers here. But
I'm sorry about that, Ian.
but certainly a lot of the 4D that comes into the academy, which is a great pity, has been the pretty picture side, and certainly when those projects have started to really get into and do the project itself, they've suffered from just doing pictures rather than actually planning things properly.
Sure. Okay, so we've given that 40 seconds or more, and let me close it up. I think pretty much everybody's voted. Some interesting results. Right, let me just share those with you all. 7% never heard of it. 40% seen a few pretty pictures. 53% used it on a project. That's great. Who wants to comment on that? James, do you want to come in first?
Yeah, okay, that's unusual compared to most of the polls we'd run like this. It usually is split between never heard of it and seeing a few pretty pictures. So that's good to see.
Yeah, good. Okay, so next question. What is the main barrier to adoption of 4D? Let me launch that. So we've got lack of skills, lack of investment. Contractors don't want transparency. I can't believe that. Or other.
That would surprise me. Personally, I would go for the lack of investment. And it's one of the things that really made me pleased to talk to one of the Polish projects that we helped recently, was the fact that even in pre-planning, they were looking at investing money properly in planning to make sure that when they got through the design phase and moving into the construction phase, they had things thought out properly before they'd even thought about putting a pen on a bit of paper. And that investment is going to pay them back considerably in the future. But I think, to me, it's that barrier to adoption. We put so much money into construction, but then we don't think about putting that money into planning. Oh, what have we got? Oh, there you go. I knew I was right, always.
I hope I didn't influence the contractors don't want transparency statement there, because yeah. So anybody want to come in and comment on that?
Yeah, again, I'd agree with the sort of lack of investment, more in time as opposed to monetary. I mean, sure. We'd spend a lot of money in tenders getting the pretty picture type stuff out, which is really good for selling the job, but we don't invest the time and effort in the people to then take that ongoing through into the projects. Just a general statement, not where I am as a business. That's just generally from what I've seen around. So yeah, definitely.
Can I add to that as well? The lack of investment is there's a root cause that sits underneath that, and it's the fact that real planning, real 4D isn't. There's not enough awareness there of the benefits. People, organisations, and individuals will upskill and move into things like 4D if they believe there's a solid return on investment, and that isn't really out there at the moment. And that's something we'll talk about that today. But yeah.
Okay, great. Let me. Yeah, sorry, I've got another question came in. Steve Crossland. I'll address that a bit later. If that's an issue with the numbers, I'll look at that. But thanks for raising it. Okay, so next question. We've got, what might be the key benefit from using 4D? So improved time management. Let me launch that. Improved cost management, improved safety management, greater confidence in project outcome, or all of the above.
Yeah, I would go for all the above, but I can see that greater confidence is actually quite an interesting one when you come to the financial side. If you're an investor right at the very beginning has got a better confidence in the project outcome, potentially the money that they'll put in and the interest that they'll charge for the project itself will be lower if the risk is less, and therefore you're going to get a better outcome on the project. So, and that's one of the things that really frustrates me, that we don't invest enough money in that initial part of the project is that if you do, you've got less risk, you've got improved all these things here. So yeah, I think it's that would be more than anything else to me.
Sure. Anybody else want to jump in on that comment? I think you said it all, Ian. Thanks very much for that. Thanks for everybody for voting on the polls as well. If anybody wants that information afterwards, I can share that as well. Just drop me a line and I can share it. Okay, so moving back to the session then. Let me just click on the next slide. So you've heard a little bit about it. 4D, what's it all about? And what I can say is projects that are planned well are safer. Methods like 4D modeling improve construction planning, brings teams together and provide a visual output that can be used in risk assessments, method statements, and of course site inductions. By planning sequences in detail, modeling logistics and access, constructing virtually in advance, hazards are identified, managed, avoided. In this panel, we'll see and hear about 4D modeling and what it means to the industry, outlining health and safety benefits, and describe how we think 4D can be used to get these benefits, plus a few more bits as well. I mean, there's going to be mention, hopefully, there's DfMA, which I know James has got on his lips to speak about. But I'll now take you into introducing the panel. Now, from left to right, we've got James. James is a specialist in 4D modeling and planning. He's a founder and projects lead at Freeform. We've then got DJ, and DJ is not going to join us, but I'll just tell you a little bit about DJ. He's a digital engineering compliance manager at Gammon Construction. I believe that's Hong Kong. He's based, James, is that correct? Yeah. Then we've got Chris Needham, director at Delta Consulting Group. Chris's journey through the construction has just taken him from a trainee quantity surveyor to site engineer to project planning roles and to managing director and company director roles. Then we've got Stacey. Stacey's with Morgan Sindall, and Stacey knows quite a lot about digital engineering. I think you're currently working in the highways sector at the moment, but has been working on airports and whatever, as a BIM manager, smart motorways, etc. Then we've got Daria. Hang on, Daria. You're with Bentley since 2018 and since April 2020 in Virtuosity, which is a Bentley company. Daria is a licensed architect with 10 years experience in design, project coordination and construction. Now as a success manager, she supports users with getting them on board with Synchro 4D and by training and using her expertise. And then we've got Peter. Peter's a planning manager, the rail division of Volker Fitzpatrick. Peter's got over 25 years experience, and he's going to share some of those pearls of wisdom with us today, particularly when it comes to 4D. So without further ado, I am going to close up and hand over to James. So just bear with me a second while I do that. James. Okay. Over to you, James.
Okay. So just checking you can see my screen and you can see the four of us and a monitor on it. Yeah, does that work? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So I won't introduce us again, but we are from, so Stacey, Peter, Chris and I and DJ are from the 4D construction group that, Chris, we started around 10 years ago, 8 years ago or something.
Yeah, around about that, 8 years or so.
There's quite a few of us in the group now. There's about 30 in the main group. We've got a few technical projects going on and we talk a lot about 4D. At the moment, we're running podcasts, Chris, maybe twice a month on particular topics.
Yeah, when we can get around to editing them.
Yeah, when Chris, yeah. We have a website that's growing and is hopefully a bit of a resource, and will become a resource for anything related to 4D. And occasionally we run conferences. We've been running them in person, but because it's 2020, we're running the next one virtually. So in like, I think 6 weeks time, we've got a conference, and there'll be lots of speakers and topics on 4D. It looks something like this. I think we've got 25 speakers now, Chris, Pete, something like that, a whole bunch of us.
Yeah, it's packed.
I don't know, Stuart, is it okay to share this afterwards with anyone? That's all the...
Yes, of course. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. So we'll start with the first question. I've got the easiest job, so I'm just going to ask the questions. And we'll keep it quite quick. We've got 25 minutes for 10 questions, so we'll kind of bounce through them. But I'll start you off with, what is 4D?
Okay, so the basics, the way that everyone basically understands 4D is linking 3D or graphical information to schedule information, and then being able to play that through and see how your design or whatever it is you're linking is built as per your schedule. I think that's how everyone understands it in its basic form. But it's a way of dynamically linking these things together, whereas prior to that we wouldn't have had that ability.
So if we're going to watch this, so this job that we both worked on, Chris, the Moorgate Shaft, we had permanent works, temporary works. I think it was pretty much all Bentley, wasn't it? It was MicroStation, Synchro.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean the schedule was done in P6. It was importing the model that you produced, James, from that design information, and then all the temporary works, and then putting it through Synchro and just assigning all of the 3D elements to the schedule elements. And
then running collaborative workshops on site. We get the engineering manager and the temporary works engineer and safety manager, that kind of thing in the room, just having reviews and chatting about it, figuring out better ways to build it.
Yeah, so this would be kind of like the final outcome. Obviously, would have gone through quite a lot of iterations prior to that. And then the idea being that you discover problems that you might not have found so quickly, and then you can iron them out and put it back to the team to review again. So it's a continuous process, just like any planning process is continuous. When you get new information, you then go back and update it.
Could I really quickly go to you, Pete, then Stacey, then Dari? Just what do you see as 4D?
Yeah, I mean, for me, being in planning roles and BIM roles and things over the years and operational roles, it's really about communicating the program to people. Again, that example was bringing all the project elements together, but could be simple things we'll talk through in a minute. Could just be a simple graphical object linked to a schedule. It doesn't have to be a full 3D. But again, it's just, we're doing a lot of Power BI stuff at the moment just to keep it simple for people. But yeah, it's just getting the message out there, understanding the program, feeding that back into the loop, and ever making the program better and the outcome better.
So
I think it's
just better.
Just make planning better. I think in its basic form, as Chris said, it's linking some visual representation to the time element, and that's what people understand. But I think we, as an industry, for those people who talk about 4D, a lot of the time it is the focus on the output, which tends to be an animation or a video or an MP4 that's put on a wall. And actually what we really need to refocus on is the fact that creating a 4D sequence is a process, and it's how we engage people better with the planning process, using ways of communicating what we expect to happen in a way that's probably easier for people to understand than a 100-page Gantt chart printed to PDF, because people are only going to take in so much of that information. Whereas if you're using visual methods of communication, it's much easier for you to get different stakeholders involved, whether that's your client, whether that's the boots on the ground saying, hang on a minute, are we really going to build it like that? And it's that great opportunity to get different voices in the room and make sure we understand as a contractor what we're going to build before we go out there with an excavator.
That's exactly it. But I think we could spend 25 minutes on this first question, so we're not going to do that. But Daria, do you want to input there, or? Hello, Daria?
Yes, just jumping in. I would add that it's not only the 3D, but also information which we have behind this model. So the intelligence which is with the 3D elements. So it's not only assigning 3D to our task, it's also assigning this data which is behind this 3D elements to our task, and then we might take decisions, change it, or plan it based on this data, which is behind the graphical representation. So actually, that's my definition of 4D. That's actually assigning of data.
We'd actually reached that, haven't we? And that's almost, we're not going to talk about the wedge, but we're talking about maturity, aren't we? We'll talk later about, Stacey, like the 2D, 4D stuff, which can just be pieces of paper or Excel or something that visualizes better than activity networks, better than Gantt charts, which can be impenetrable. But also, Dari, that's the top end, isn't it? It's fully information loaded models that are giving you analytics and volumes of earth that are being moved, or tonnage of steel, and where you are on program. So it's not just a few animations, it's everything. It's kind of, and there aren't many projects doing all of that. But yeah, okay. Does that question answered? Stuart, feel free to just say you haven't answered the question or you've answered it too long.
No, you've answered the question. I thought that was great. Brilliant.
Okay, so why do teams do it? Why do we bother? Why don't we stay in the 19th century? Why don't we stay with Gantt? Why are we bother investing effort in something? I'll start, actually, I'll reverse it. Daria, why do teams do 4D? Do you know? Do we know? I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
Saying 2020.
Yes, on mute. So everyone has different reasons. Like every user we met, they have some different reasons. Some of them, they want to just be able to control the project better, so more from project manager perspective. Other ones, they just want to have this nice outputs, nice visualizations, because they want to sell it to the client. They want to go and win the tender and prove that they are capable of doing that. So every time is different reasons, but all of them, they are good reasons.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so for me, it's just bringing the information alive in a way that everyone can understand it. So, you know, when I got into planning, I came from an operational background, wasn't really, massively into drawings ourselves, and then started planning, and you start looking at drawings and you just go, I'm trying to make sense of these drawings. So I used to just create models in SketchUp, very basic tools to understand the job and work out, and then work my way through, sequencing those. And the amount of times you've sit in a meeting, people are discussing over drawings, and you just bring up a model and you show them, and then you start turning things on and off, and people just go, oh yeah, I get it now. And the amount of debates that have gone on for weeks and weeks and weeks that have been resolved because of just that simple level of common understanding between everyone. Because you've got people who come from finance backgrounds, stakeholders who don't understand construction, all these different rafts of people, and then the real technical engineers who are massively into the whole thing, and they can understand a job by looking at a drawing, So giving everyone a common understanding and adding that time element so they can see what we're building and when we're building it, just brings everyone together on the same level, I think.
Chris and Stacey, I'm going to assume you're going to have the same answer, so I'm going to move on to the next one. What is 2D, 4D? Because what is that?
2D, 4D, or someone called it recently 2.4D, is kind of this concept to me that you don't always have to have a 3D model to start getting involved in doing 4D. Traditionally you would, but for me, if you've got any form of visual representation and you can assign time to it, then you can get people involved and get the process that you would do if you had a 3D model. You can still do the same process and get a lot of the same outcomes because of that improved communication, the common understanding of what you've done, and interface management. So I think this is one of Peter's where he's used Power BI. But previously on projects, I started doing 4D by literally getting coloured squares in Excel before we worked out, moved on to creating 3D models, just so that people could see where different things were. There's tools out there. There's some quite nice tools that just take it from the kind of time slices that people traditionally do of You know, how many of us in project delivery have taken a general arrangement and we've put it in PowerPoint and we've drawn shapes around it, and then the program changes and you draw shapes around it again and you duplicate the slide. And there's other tools out there that you can take those shapes and dynamically link them to a program. And that to me is, you haven't got a traditional 4D output as in 3D plus time, but you've got this halfway house of a 2D output plus time, so 2D, 4D, 2.4D.
Yeah. Awesome. It's visual planning, isn't it? It doesn't have to be
visual planning.
We'll probably end this presentation, this talk, on the problems with terminology and naming it 4D, because it's then 4D seen as a terminology, is seen as something technical. It's not something for people and teams to do. And so, anyway, yeah, okay. Can I just take the next question, if that's okay?
Can I just make a quick one on that with Stacey? We did a really good example of this on Crossrail at one point, was taking possession of railway tracks, because you don't need a complex 3D model to put a box around a bit of a railway track, but we needed to see the sequence of how we occupied each of those possessions and then release them back into Network Rail. Worked brilliantly, and you're completely right. You don't need to have a complex 3D model to do good 4D planning.
Yeah, and what I would say on that is for linear infrastructure. So I've worked a lot on roads. Actually, if you try and 4D the 3D model, if you're looking at a road that's 30 miles long and you're turning on and off a manhole, no one can see it. No one can see it. So for situations like that, unless you're going to set something up that's got loads of viewpoints that are actually just focusing in on lots of different elements, even, you know, applying 4D to boxes or, you know, virtual post-it notes or something, as you say, that's all you need to know where people are. You don't need to see each pipe going individually in the ground.
Good. So you're jumping ahead now, because I've got an example of that later, but fantastic. Okay. Okay, so could I do this one just by describing what happens?
Your day job, James. Yeah.
Yeah. So this here is a screen recording from a workshop, and this is an answer to a question we often get, which is, how do you actually run these workshops? What do they look like? And if a model is set up in the right way, you can get demolition contractor, logistics manager, you can get the team in the room, and you can kind of do all this visual planning live. So Stacey, is this kind of like your Excel, but with the library of plant? Is that true?
A lot of the time, yeah, it's a lot snazzier, but yeah, getting people in the room and getting them to talk about things, yeah.
The same thing, isn't it? There's no Gantt chart here. The Gantt chart sits there somewhere. There is a schedule, there's a program, but it's engaging people, and that's the whole point of what we're talking about. I'll move on to the next question, trying to keep this quick. Daria, when should we do 4D?
Earliest, better. I would start in the initial planning stage, because at this moment there is kind of gap between designers and construction team, and designers, they don't have experience. How do we construct? And yeah, theoretically they should go to construction site, but usually they never do that. And when we start 4D planning, they will understand what are the challenges, and we might be able to make changes in our design and get better outcomes, like reduce the impact on environment, for example, or some hazards. So this is earliest better.
That's a huge point, and that's something we've talked about in the 4D construction group a lot, that, well, we shouldn't be called the 4D construction group, we should be called the planning group or something, because engagement with designers and project managers, the early days, it's front loading a project, isn't it, Chris? It's that kind of, we talk about that a lot. So
yeah, I mean, it's trying, obviously the sooner you can get people involved, the better, to inform the decisions around design, which inevitably come out too late when contractors start to get involved a bit further down the line. You know, they start to see these problems, say, well, we need to redo parts of this, and that wastes a lot of time, probably burns a lot of money as well in fees. So I mean, that's a procurement issue which we won't be able to solve right now, but yeah, the idea in the future, hopefully this promotes earlier contractor engagement in in that concept design process, and then we should get less waste and better outcomes.
And these kind of things, considering constructability, buildability, delivery, temporary works early, also opens the door for more siting and DfMA and introduces more options to a project early. And there's a whole load around this that we could go on. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, but it just goes back to how it's going to be bought, isn't it?
And there's also regulations, of course. There's rules and regulations and there's standards coming out that aren't read by a lot of designers, that they are obviously responsible for the delivery and temporary works and arrangements and construction of projects. So it's interesting to see things like Part 6, PAS 1192 Part 6. Will that be an ISO soon? Probably. Doesn't matter what it's labelled. There's a lot around this and responsibility for designers to construction that 4D supports and is a platform for, in the way that Gantt charts are.
Yeah, and again,
Part
it's that
6 is the first part of the kind of information management standards, which actually directly references 4D sequencing.
Yes, 27 references, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, Pete. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, and again, it's part of that wider, going back to our podcast, if anyone listened to it, but it's if you've only got 2D, link the 2D and visually show people what you're doing, isn't it? Because then you can impart that information onto people a lot better. People do so much good work in tenders, and even like in the very early stages, they do the whole logistics plans, but they're done on PDFs that get hidden and no one knows they exist, so they go and redo it. Again, if we can do that in more intelligent ways, people can take that information and build on it, turn the 2D into a 3D as you move through the project, but at least get it in a visual way people can understand.
And just don't
get creative.
Yeah. Okay, so how do we do 4D? I don't know how much. I mean, we could talk for a few hours on this. Can I start it? It's like Chris, as you said, it's 3D. It's geometry from somewhere, from some design authoring, or even SketchUp or Excel state. So you're kind of taking something from somewhere that represents things happening, location based, attaching it to information of time, so tasks and activities, and then other stuff as well. Does anyone want to jump in? What are the basic ingredients? Daria, do you want that one? Or not? Anyone?
I mean, I was just going to say that there's as many ways of doing 4D technically as there are solutions that people want to come up with, like the kind of, we in construction, we're just here to solve problems, and like we're pretty good at using what we've got to do that. How you technically do 4D then again links to what kind of software you might want to be using. So I don't think we can sit here in a half-hour call and tell people, what buttons to click or things like that. And that's why we have to go back to the components that make it up and why and who needs to be involved, because some 4D might be actually how do we build a program up from scratch. So we haven't got the Gantt chart or the P6 schedule to attach to a model, and you're actually creating that by creating the 4D first, in effect. And sometimes you've got a 3D over here, you've got a program over here, and you're using 4D to mash the two together. So, or even mash the two together, and then you're adding more detail in the 4D without it being in one side or the other first. So I think we can only really be high level in this kind of thing as to how to do 4D, other than how we bring people together and what kind of tools and techniques you could use.
I like this reversion that you mentioned, that we might start actually from 4D and then look for our components of the 3D. I think that's a really good way of thinking, that we consider like reversing, not starting from 3D model, starting from 4D model, and then build our 3D model so that it's suitable for 4D.
Yeah, and again, to your point early, Daria, we had one job where we got a whole job in PDFs, and we actually created a model from the PDFs with all the attributed information in, and then used that to create the duration. So just basically applied rates to the quantities to create the durations, imported that into P6, linked the logic, and then pushed it back out. So again, we used the information we had to build the model, to then build the program, for then the program to link back to the model. So again, it was that whole bit of people talking and how does this work, how does that work. But yeah, it's that whole thing, just getting the people involved, talking to each other, making sure the information aligns to some degree, and yeah, making sure that it works There's a bit of a theme through all these again, isn't there?
And this allows us to start for the initial planning. So because we don't need a model at the beginning.
Yes. Yeah, it's all iterative, isn't it? People, model, timing, program, sequence, supply chain, procurement, the whole thing. And that's what we all encourage and want. This is an easy question for you, Chris. So how do you convince teams this is a method of working and not a pretty animation? Although obviously they can be pretty, right? We're not going to.
Yeah, you make yours look nice, don't you?
Yeah.
But, yeah, they're obviously very functional too. But it is just it's a planning process, isn't it? So it's only as good as the planning process, I would say. And you are adding additional tools to produce these outputs, and but you're kind of building them into your planning process and making best use of the people around you to do that. So if you're good at doing that, then something like this will probably just come naturally to you. You know, it'll almost be a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, this is yeah, we're doing this anyway. We're just not dynamically linking it, maybe. And that's really the only difference, I think. So teams that plan well will work on good projects, and those projects will run well. But being able to do that in 4D, hopefully, it just takes that a step further.
James, I'll just come in on that if I can. One of the observations I've got, this goes back to a conversation I had not too long ago with a retired works manager who used to say the best way of getting his guys to work was to give it him visually, and if he didn't get a sketch, he felt he was badly done to. And giving him a page of script didn't really work, didn't cut it. It might have identified bullet points, but if he didn't get that sketch, you were out of favor. That job, okay, it would succeed, but it wouldn't achieve success without, well, in the same degree it would if it had a sketch, and a well annotated sketch that was signed for did the trick. And what we're talking about here is the same thing. If you can get that message over visually, we all work better with pictures. There's no doubt about it. If we can get that message over, then it's pretty much job done, really. Okay, I know there's a few other complications besides, but it's the same with the subcontract, the supply chain, the ones, twos, and threes. You know, multiple subcontractors, they all need animation. It all takes time. And doing it with the visualization, I think, saves so much time, and you've almost got surety on what you're delivering. You know, if they can see it, they might even help you improve the delivery. If they can see a better way of doing stuff, rather than actually get to the workplace and start operating there, they can see it beforehand. They can help. So I think there's an added benefit that we might have just touched on a little bit at the beginning, but for me, you know, get everybody involved as soon as you can. It's like having a client look at some of the you know, the potential design hiccups that might come later. Get them to see it sooner. You know, virtual reality, I think, is another subject. But great. Sorry, I'm stealing the show. James, back over to you.
No, yeah.
Go on, I was just going to dive in on. So yeah, what Chris was saying again, and that's what we're looking at, is making it part of the planning process, as I say, and using coding to link things together. So the Power BI 2D, 4D there is just codes in the program and codes against shapes, and they merge together. So again, there's minimal effort in doing it. You create some shapes in the first place, you create some relationships with codes, and then every time you update the program, it's kind of managing itself. So yes, it's just that. Make it part of the process. Don't worry about the higher rendered visuals unless you need to. There are times you do. Tender visuals and all that are important, but you can do those off of proper 4D sequences like you do, James. You create proper 4D and then you create nice visual. You're not focusing on the visual, and but you're actually linking it properly. So
yeah, there's to the question as well, how can champions within organizations who are already sold on this, how can they sell it to the teams around them and their senior management? Sometimes we'll say, we'll use analogies that Gantt charts are kind of code, aren't they? They're HTML, they're music that's written down. You listen to music, you visit websites. And the 4D is that kind of front end. It allows you to act and do things with the program and plan your works. You don't have to get into what, I mean, Gantt charts fantastic, activity networks fantastic, but they are hard to interpret. So it's kind of try and break cultural barriers as well. And so
I think the more people interact with them as well, it's seen as more of the process and not the output. And I tell you something, some of the 4Ds that I've done do not look like that because they're of large earthworks. And I did once have a project director say to me, this needs to look sexier. And it's, you know, what's the aim of why we're doing this? Like, is it winning work? Is it, you know, showing your client what you can do? Or is it an engineering tool that actually the primary function of what you're doing is so that people can see what it is? And would people have got more benefit if the earth was brown and textured in that versus brown cuboids? Like, I personally don't think so, because that's what we were using it for in that circumstance. So, and if you can get more people involved in it, then it doesn't necessarily have to be pretty. And sometimes you get benefit out of it being really pretty.
But that gets you off the ground, doesn't it? That gets you the value that then gets you to the next stage and the next stage, and then Daria, some of your stuff about very heavily loaded models that have got all the works behind them. We see a lot of organizations and individuals want to jump right to that maturity level 5, and they can't get there without heavy investment, and they have to sell that investment. And exactly, Stacey, as you say, it's kind of like start at step 1, do something, even just use Excel, use Excel or Plus, and keep going. So yeah,
that's the thing. Yeah, often the starting point is someone's seen a tender visual, haven't they? And they go, we want to do 4D and we want this, and it's like, no. You have to go right back to the beginning and go, let's draw some blocks, link some blocks, and then develop those blocks. And it's just that. So the earlier people get involved, you can get the proper process running rather than you ending up with a fancy video and then trying to backtrack into something more simplistic. And that's
you use fancy figures on, and you've had a team of people building something for weeks, and it can't be updated, and then the values drop, and then the management look onto the next project and say, well, we're not doing that again, we didn't get any value.
Yeah.
So that a lot.
If I could jump in, there is one point more, because in 4D we involving people earlier, and we can involve much more people in it. We can make our partners, our subcontractors, and the construction team feeling importance of their job. We shouldn't forget it. I used to work on site, and you know, people, if they are proud of the work they're doing, they will do it carefully, and they will, you know, do it with understanding. So I think it has strong motivation capability. So not only our nice schedule, but also human factor.
It's almost paying respect to the experience of the team, the operations team, the team who are going to go out to do it, who have 20 years, 25 years, 26 years experience, that we don't do with Gantt charts. Having a planner on a project with a Gantt chart, I mean, we could go for hours. I'm just going to go to the next question. So, Peter, should this be a planning or a BIM role? Easy question.
So someone has to own it, obviously, but it does need inputs from the whole project team. So I've been on jobs, you know, where the planners are owning it, and they're creating it based on their thoughts from their program, and then they get a bit of possessions and things. Then you get it where the BIM function owns it, and then, or the digital team as it is now, you know, a lot of companies have a digital engineering teams who are creating 4Ds without talking to the planners or the site team to see how it works. So yeah, I mean, the information comes from the program. So in my mind, it should be sort of owned more through and making sure it represents the program through from the planning function, but it needs support from the BIM, the digital team, whoever that is. The designers need to feed into that to make sure their elements are split correctly. You know, certain tools allow you to virtually split objects. We could have a debate for a week about whether that's appropriate or not. But again, do you want people on site cutting up walls that the designer has designed in a certain way and saying, we're going to pull them like this? Well, actually, that needs to feed back to the designer, because they need to make sure that the joints work. Is it couplers? Is there splicing issues? Whatever the rebar detailing that comes out of it, you know. So yeah, the point is the conversation needs to be forced. It needs all the team involved, but yeah, I think it needs to be kind of led and driven from more of the planning side of things, because it is communicating the program, and it should be based on the program that you're using to build the job.
Chris?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that in a lot of ways, really. I mean, it needs to be someone who's good at communicating and good at getting teams together. And if that's the planner's role, you know, someone who's responsible for the overall schedule, then it kind of automatically falls into that person's lap, or at least it did with me anyway. But yeah, it certainly needs someone who understands the project fully. Not, yeah, I guess all aspects of the project, you know, the scope, the design, everything, you know. So whether that's the project manager, obviously the project manager should know all this as well, or the planner, or someone, or maybe, you know, one of the engineers. But generally, I think it's going to be someone who's reasonably proficient in planning software or 4D software, who also understands the process of how to do these things efficiently too, with whatever software you're using, because there's no getting away from that element of it.
So are we in that, we're in that transition period between models, Peter, as you're saying, kind of fully coded and models building themselves, and it still needs a resource on a project of some description to do some of this gluing together and coordination.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, okay. I think I jumped through some things just to show you a nice animation. So if I go back, we had a question. We've only got 2 questions left. How are we doing for time, Stuart?
We're okay. We're okay. We've got a couple of other questions that come in online as well, so we're okay. Carry on. We've also got the extra half an hour should we need it, which I think we probably will at this point.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. So what are the top 5 metrics that we need to report from 4D work? I mean, if we take out the term 4D from there, from planning workflows, what are the kind of things that are important to reflect when you're monitoring, reporting, controlling projects? Anyone want that first question?
So many things. Top 5. If you're talking talking KPIs or things specifically to do with 4D, I mean, there's so many things you can assign to a schedule: activity counts, cost, resources. You know, it really does depend on what it is you're wanting to capture. You know, whether it's outputs of concrete, not rebar fixed, etc. It could be anything. So in terms of 4D workflows, sorry, Pete, if you've got
no, something. I was just going to say, in terms, again, if it's talking about the workflow of using 4D, you kind of, and it's a massively hard one to think. It's the whole, well, we wouldn't have done it wrong anyway type thing with clash detection, isn't it? It's like, what's the point? We'd have sorted that out anyway, it'd be fine. But if there was some way of recording how many things that you identified before you went and built them, because you did 4D, you know, that's the bit, and that's what we're talking about. The workflow of 4D is you get people involved, you talk to the engineers, you're talking to the designers, and you're ironing things out before you even get to the pretty visual, aren't you? Because you're doing the rustic stuff in the background, having the workshops. Yeah, one really good metric. Again, I don't know how you do it.
How good is how do you put a metric against how good your program is? Like, variance from what you said you were going to do surely is the one that you'd want to measure, because if we've planned it and everything goes to plan, then they should be really, really close, and you'd expect that if you've involved your team by doing 4D sequencing, then you should have, as Pete said, you should have ironed these things out hopefully sooner, and therefore what goes in the program should be more realistic and achievable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it could be any of those things. It could be like the amount of float that gets eroded between updates, the amount of logic changes you have to do. You know, these things could be measured, I guess. But how you compare that to maybe something you did in the past without doing it with 4D on a similar project,
you end up using religious terminology. We become evangelists. So we believe in this. We have faith in this. Like, well, yeah, it's just better. Come on. I mean, Daria, you were going to add something, I think.
Yeah, like I could add what are, you know, the metrics that the users who come to us are looking for, and they are cost metrics.
Yeah. Return on investment. Yeah.
I'm getting, they are related to cost controlling questions, which are of course connected with the statusing control, because they want to understand what's happening with money. So that's important metric, and probably I would put it on the on the SPIFE list for sure.
So attaching cost information. So we won't talk about 5D, or we don't like the term 5D, but attaching cost to quantities, to resources, to tasks,
and tracking over time. Yes. So what is and like using AVA method to track the, you know, for project management. So that's important metric. So
I think the last question. Oh no, there's one last question, which I think we've kind of answered quite a few times, but let's have a go. So, what have been the greatest barriers to entry for adopting 4D in the last decade?
Yeah, cost and time.
And we'll try and go for root cause rather than the software is hard to use. Like, what is it? Is it culture, Chris? Have we talked about that a lot? Is it contract and procurement?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, there's not really traditionally been enough time or focus put into planning generally, and it's one of the things that often gets cut before you even get onto a project in the prelims. People are looking to save money; they'll just strip out that resource. So you know, it's kind of left down to the site managers to do their programs on a lot of building projects, and they obviously don't have the time to do anything like this, especially on some contracts like NEC, for example. So I do think it needs a culture change and a change of habits, and maybe we're quite keen to rush into things before we've got enough information to form a good plan. But yeah, that's a systemic thing that we're not going to solve. But in the way things are set up right now, I think it's more a case of a lot of people go back to the return on investment and trying to understand that, trying to say, well, if I'm going to invest in this, or you know, cost me this up front, what's it going to save me? And that is a really hard question to answer. And a lot of the time, you're dealing with people who fundamentally, if you can't give them that answer, then they're just not going to buy it. So, and then if it's not coming from the top, then it's just down to people like, you know, Stacey and Peter to try and just do it themselves. You know, take it on their own backs and try and push it up rather than it from coming down, which hopefully in the future it'll be coming from the top.
So DJ threw a few numbers yesterday about papers he'd read, and some of us, you and I, anecdotally from projects where we've done this, of possible cost savings of around 1 to 5%. And the actual fee, the cost of doing this is 0.025% or something. It's a marginal cost for a very good chance at more than 1% total capex construction cost saving. So that's maybe something we could do in the group, is start trying to quantify some of these things. But what do you think, Pete?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I mean, you hear, I've heard comments over the years, not in current company, I'll just add, current company, but you hear comments, you know, about the fact that it's fairly well accepted that most jobs overrun by 30 to 40% and all this sort of thing, and you know, we'll make money out of change, and those sort of flippant comments from people. And it's like, well, we don't often make money out of change. We should do, but we don't. But again, because we can't demonstrate the change very well, so all of this sort of thing links back to demonstrating change and actually reducing the 30 to 4%, so we get less change because we knock the change out before it happens. So I think there's agree with everything Chris said there, but there's also this little bit of still going back to Stuart's earlier question there at the beginning of the visibility of things. Some people don't like the visibility. They want to kind of save a few things for later in case they need to, you know, we're a bit behind or something, we can use some change to cover it up, and you know, that sort of thing. Because I mean, NEC enforces a, you know, basically an open, honest program, doesn't it? So to me, it goes back to back. But 4D is then the next level of that, because everyone can understand the program that you've submitted, as well as it supposedly being realistic, so they can kind of challenge the program more because they can see it more, which should be a good thing. But again, certain people think that that's not necessarily the thing we should do. Going back to the culture issue there, Chris, again, and it's the way we used to do stuff type thing.
So culturally, I've worked with planners when we've been doing 4D that has been like, I don't want people to see what it is, because I don't know whether they were feeling that we were taking their job and just trying to say we're coordinating the information in your program with a designer's information. We're not doing the planning this was me in a BIM role. We're coordinating information between different disciplines and getting people into a room. Like if I have to, you know, get two teams in a room and call it a BIM meeting for you to talk about how you're not going to dig out each other's haul roads, that's what I'll call it. But it's not like, you know, 4D in the 4D that we were doing wasn't going to take away your job as a planner. Like it would help people understand what you were saying should happen, and let people feedback. And sometimes it was a bit like, well, I'm going to sit in my room with my door closed and I don't want people to feedback. But I mean, if you liken it to health and safety, you know, we have things like point of work risk assessments, which is, you know, you brief the team on what the plan of works is, how you're going to do something, and then that's people going, hang on a minute, something's changed, like, or has something changed before we actually start work? So why do we not, unless we've got, you know, plan of the day type things, plan of the weeks, collaborative planning, you know, if they don't understand the program that they're going to deliver, how can people throughout the workforce know when something's being done differently? Because that's where the risks usually are, is when people actually either don't understand what they were what the project is expecting them to do, or something changes and they don't realise the impact of what they've done. You know, people will try and do their best, but might not realise that it's had an impact on something that they completely weren't aware of. So I do think there's a cultural thing there, and say the more people understand what it is, the bigger the opportunity for people to notice when something's differently.
Can I add a question to this? So the barrier is always people, isn't it? So we you know, we build 4D models and we get introduced to teams. It's very rarely the planner who brings us in. It's usually the BIM lead, the commercial manager, health and safety person. It's probably 1 in 10 projects a planner actually says, hey, can you guys come in and build a 4D model because I want to present it to the team. Now that's kind of odd, isn't that weird?
Yeah.
That a planning tool, and it's usually someone else and they want to understand the program. So is that?
Yeah, again, in the planner's head, they've done their job, they've produced the schedule, it's all logic link, it's all correct, they've done all their validation checks, it's fine, crack on and build it. Again, but other people don't understand it, isn't it? So that's when they ask the question of how can we visualize this program in a better way? And that's the way I've been approaching it, you know, certainly now.
Yeah, they know exactly what's happening, but no one else does.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is part of your job as a planner to actually get that message across, and you know, try and show how it is going to work. So yes, it is surprising that you're not getting as much uptake from planners. But yeah, I don't know why.
They hate changes. That's the human nature. So
Yeah.
But this shouldn't be changed. This shouldn't really be changed, because I don't know how people put their schedules together without drawing something, you know, without sketching something out. I really don't know how people do it. Because when you're putting a schedule together, you're kind of visualizing how it's going together in your head.
Or marking up a drawing or whatever it is, isn't it?
Yeah, and you want to get that message over to someone else. Like, so what better way than doing it this way?
Chris, I always like your comment that it's, you know, it's not your program, it's our program. This is, we're all going to go and build this thing.
You want everyone else to share in the you know, in the good and the bad.
Well, I think it goes back as well to one of the questions earlier about, you know, who should be doing this? Is it a planner or is it a BIM person? I mean, to me, as a digital person, as a BIM person, we should be a support function if we're doing this. In the same way that a planner should be a support function, because the program should be owned by the site team, you know, who are essentially the ones who are, you know, agents of agents, probably the people who are deciding how their bit of work is being done, and planners are coordinating that and making sure, you know, doing the commercial aspects of it. And we've had great success working with kind of section engineer sub-agent level at kind of detailed 6-week look ahead 4D, like really them understanding what they've put in a program that's in Excel, as opposed to something that's strategic level that's at P6, that's, you know, getting submitted monthly, and like helping them have those tools. But, you know, if it takes a BIM person or a digital person to say, okay, well, we've got program here, that's split down this way. Do we have visual content to match that with? Okay, if not, then maybe we can help specify that visual content. Maybe we're the interface with the designers or your CAD team or whoever's creating that. And then, you know, who sticks it together? It could be the planner, it could be the BIM person, it could be a 4D planner, it could be any number of these people. There's just different aspects that need to just, you know, interface, isn't it? As opposed to, you know, the planner's always going to be the person who's seen to be owning a program, and actually they should be seen as having that program that is the ownership of the construction team.
Yeah, this is not to say there aren't planners out there who are adopting the tool, but it's probably 1 in 10. And
guys, I'm just gonna jump in, James. We've done an hour. So for those that signed up for an hour, thank you very much for joining. We are going to carry on, if that's okay to everybody. We have a few more questions, so let's continue if that's acceptable to everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, you better fire the other questions in, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, I've got one question. I mean, it's all fantastic stuff. This. One of the questions I've got here, and I talked to Daria about this as well, is multiple players in the supply chain, so multiple subcontractors, getting them to adopt and embrace 4D is a bit of a challenge. So what have the practitioners done to bring them along? What measures have you put in place? Peter, can I ask you that one first?
Yeah. So generally what we would do is sit down with them. So I'm just on a project where we're just starting off, and there's one of the specialist designers is massively involved in the main design. So we just had a execute. So I'm in a planning role now, but I'm sort of doing a bit of information management as well. But we had a bit of a kickoff meeting. We brought that through, went through our aspirations with the project, said that, you know, we're really going to be doing, I didn't say we were doing 4D, but we talked about the fact we were going to use the model to look at health and safety, look at logistics, look at sequencing, look at that sort of thing. So skirting around it rather than saying specifically. And again, for them, they were like, yeah, no, that's really good, because we need to understand what you're building, how what we're building fits into it, et cetera, et cetera. And I know Stacey's done a lot of work with supply chain, with temporary work suppliers over the years, bits and pieces. We had a couple of jobs where we've gone in with the demo people, and they'd actually created their own models and worked out their demo sequences in 4D. Again, unbeknown, we didn't ask them. We just talked to them and said, oh yeah, that's just how we do it, because that feeds in our method statement. So there's a whole raft of people in the supply chain that do it. And I think the general issue is we don't talk to them, so therefore they don't offer it. Most of temporary, you know, I say a lot of temporary works design is done, which causes a lot of logistical issues. You know, it's not just about the design elements, it's everything else around it. They do this stuff anyway, and again, the steelwork fabricators, they've been modeling for years. They always have model information. Do we ask for it? Probably not. We ask for 2D drawings, so in PDF. So speak to people, get them involved.
Is it likely to be? Is it a time thing? Will it come eventually?
Yes.
I think yes, and a lot of it's there. We just don't ask the questions as well.
Okay.
Talk to people as early as you can, get them involved, find out where they are, and if they can change. And you'd probably be surprised how many of them already do stuff, to be fair.
Or if they are not doing, we might just show them, not telling them that you have to do it, but after some time they might buy it because they will see what they can get from it.
Mm. Yeah, everyone's looking to get a commercial advantage somewhere, aren't they? And at the moment, those that are planning well and doing this well are obviously realizing that. And, you know, they're not necessarily going to shout about it because at the moment, that's their competitive advantage.
Yeah.
So,
The supply chain are doing a lot more 4D than the general contractors. Definitely.
yeah.
Maybe when 4D becomes a standard, if students learn about 4D at universities and they come to industry like with this new way of thinking, that's kind of standard, that we have 4D and we should use it, that might cause some mental change. And we won't be looking anymore at 4D as something only for very advanced users.
Yeah. And
kind of conversation is very old in 20 years of us talking about the benefits of something that's so obvious.
Yeah, I said that 10 years ago.
Yeah, but that wasn't recorded. So
I was just going to add that a lot of people still, though, even on jobs where there is 3D information, still don't have access to it or don't use it. You know, so that again, we're still in that entry level of, and I always go right the way back of, okay, here's a simple 3D model that we've got from the designer, start having a look at it, and then people will start clicking around, turning things on and off, and then they get into that, oh, can we do some sequencing? Rather than trying to go straight in with, oh, we can sequence this model, we can make it really good, we can put it in VR, which we can, you know, there's benefits of that in certain instances. But if you start with that, people get scared. If you start with, this is a model, you can navigate it and make that easy to do, then you can build the confidence. And again, it's the same with the supply chain. If you go in too hard, you scare them off almost.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Ian, for typing this in the box. Sent this to the entire audience. Thank you for that. So the audience, what's your experience of 4D for temporary works? Has anybody got any nuggets they want to share on that? Yes, I think. Have we got a nugget that's come in? Just let me check on that. Yeah, thanks, Dave. Use 4D for temporary works all the time, scaffolding, logistics, laydown areas. Yeah. Anybody got any other examples they want to share with us? That'd be great. Maybe we could bring you in and you could talk directly to the panel. We've got plenty of time left. If that was okay, you've got a mic. We can open your mic up and let them speak. Let anybody speak directly. Happy to do that. I want to ask a question, and this is open to anybody, but I want to talk about lineal projects, and yeah, the experience of lineal highways. Stacey, you're on a project now. Peter, you're on rail. All lineal projects. Are we talking examples of using 4D in exactly the same way we are when we're building vertically? Are we saying the same thing? Stacey, do you want to answer that one? Do you want to come in on that first?
I think,
maybe James.
I think the process is the same. I just think sometimes the most benefit you're going to get is from having different visual outputs than necessarily the 3D model. I mean, what we've done previously is kind of, and this comes down to whether either your designers are going to produce it or whether you've got your own CAD resource to make this yourself, but making kind of blocks that actually represent trades being in a certain area, rather than the actual the time being against the asset that's going in the ground. So as I said, from a viewpoint where you can see an entire highway where you might have 4 gangs working 15, 20 kilometers apart from each other, you're not going to see the detail. So either you're going to have a really wide view of showing blocks of work that are getting done, or you're going to have detailed views for each of those 4 teams and what they're doing. And again, it comes back to, are you doing 4D to coordinate the activities of your entire project? Or, on a previous smart motorway scheme, we did 4D of one particular junction because there was soil nailing involved, there was embankment work, there was, lots of people and lots of interfaces. So it wasn't, the whole 20 kilometers of motorway wasn't 4D, but one specific use case was, because that's where the team thought that there'd be value in understanding the detail of how that was constructed, rather than the entire strategic level program. But as I said before, like, to me, if you've got essentially squares and you can allocate time to those, or different coloured squares that show different
Sure.
different activities, because even like if you take surfacing and you've got a 3D model of surfacing, often that's not broken down in the way that you're going to, it might have a surface that's between one junction and another junction. You're not going to do that in one shift. So either you end up with the entire job turning itself on and being like, hey, we're going to do some surfacing here for the next 3 months, or you need a different way of separating those little bits down.
Yeah. All right, thanks for that, Stacey. I want to just make a note. In fact, Abhishek asked a question here, and I want to put it to the panel. Are there any live projects that engineers and project managers can support on volunteering roles and in return gain first-hand experience of the exciting work the 4D group does? I'm sure, James, you want to talk to that one. Maybe you could take that offline and have a separate discussion with him. I'm
hiring at the moment, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll follow up. Thanks for asking. Now, we put a plea out there, and thanks, Dave, for coming back. Dave's question was: use 4D for temporary works all the time, scaffolding, logistics, laydown, management, etc. Dave, I'm going to bring you in. You've said you want to do that, so let me bring you into the panel. Let me just let me give you the. Right, I'm bringing you in now. So if you want to on mic, you're now in the group of panelists, and you can maybe share your experiences there, Dave. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
most of 2020. Yeah. Okay.
If you've got a webcam, we could open your webcam as well.
Well, I'm in the house, so I'm going to leave that off.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Temporary works, yeah. The field that's our 4D focus is in oil and gas, and we focus a lot on shutdowns and operating plant. So we're working on a lot of confined spaces, a lot of restricted areas. We're looking at specifically shutdowns, so time constraints are hugely important. The plant is shut down and started up on time. So from a temporary works point of view, trying to work out available space for materials laydown, footprints for cranes, a lot of trucks and that coming in and out of site. So these are generally not catered for in our schedules that we're seeing, so they tend to be missed. So when we go in and review the initial schedules, we tend to go in and supplement them with specific activities for logistics. Scaffolding is a big concern. The last thing you want to be doing is putting scaffolding up, especially if there's a lot of it, and then having to take it down because it's blocking access for something. So just purely by introducing the temporary works into the shutdown schedules ensures that there's no time wasted, everything fits where it's supposed to go, and it gives a lot of the boots on the ground an idea of where things should be at specific times. So yeah, we use it a lot.
Yeah, that's really good.
Anybody want to reply to Dave?
Well, I was just going to say it is a big challenge, and again, and this is coming back to Chris's point, that when you're putting a program together, you need to at least have, old school, you'd have the drawings in front of you to start looking at. And again, when I started in planning, I started knocking models up because you instantly go with well, how does that work? How does this work? And the project I'm on at the moment, the other week, I just was going through linking up the program that I'd inherited with the model that we'd got from the Grip 4 designer. And again, you start linking those together and you go, okay, there's one activity for the whole of the piling mat. And then you look and you go, well, there's a 3 meter drop between two sides here. So how do you do that in one hit? Surely you have to put some sheet piles in, and there's excavation because so there's and you start noticing the holes in the program, don't you, as soon as you get into those conversations, which you just cannot get from a 2D environment. Even if you're the most experienced engineer or operations person, you will miss stuff unless you can visualize it in a proper way, really. So that's good.
Yeah, you get a high quality schedule out of it, don't you?
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. It's all the what goes around this corner and how does that bit quite work type stuff when you get into a 3D, which gets hidden on drawings and nobody talks about until it happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
we have a lot of engagement with crane operators that specifically want to use the 4D model to see who's working, especially if there's a lot of blind lifts, who's working in certain areas when they're trying to do some critical lifts. And we use, from a safety point of view, we use that to educate the guys that are working in those work fronts that specific times during the day there's going to be a heavy lift taking place, so you're going to have to get out of there from a safety point of view. So that's a big piece of the 4D planning for us as well.
So the benefits are clear with that then, Dave, and presumably you're doing that with morning briefings before they go out.
Yeah, toolbox talks are we're using a lot of the 4D imagery for toolbox talks. Sometimes it's difficult when you're on site, so we tend to do a lot of screenshots, but ideally we want to try and get them directly in the 4D model and visualizing it and asking questions.
Yeah. Sorry, Peter.
Can I have a quick Dave?
Yeah, I'll try and remember what I was going to say.
Are you able to capture those time clashes that you have find out with 4D planning, you know, like to compare how it would be if you would follow the original schedule? And have you kept this information?
It's a difficult one, that. Yeah, we do try and feed that. The first part of our evaluation of any schedule is we attempt to validate the sequence of activities. Yeah, if we can try and take 2 or 3 days out of a shutdown, that's a huge cost benefit to an asset. Multi-million pounds, if you like, or dollars. So yeah, if we can take days out of the schedule, it's ideal. A lot of the plans we're working on at the moment are yet to happen, which is another good thing. We're engaging early. So yeah, as we develop the schedules, it's good to feed back where we've taken some time out by identifying those clashes.
Very good.
I think the procurement of that extra information as well is really key, because, you know, if coming from a main contractor background, we hopefully eventually will get a design model of the asset in its finished state, and there's this gap as to getting the 3D content, if we're doing traditional 3D, 4D, of the cranes and your laydown areas and your plant mats and your temporary works and things like that, or your excavations, because, you know, are you getting temporary excavations modelled by your main designer, or is that left up to the contractor to work out? And if so, is the contractor taken on board that actually not only do we need to have, say, a cofferdam modelled, but maybe the excavation for that, so that we can actually then visualise what we're going to do, not just for the final asset, and how much time can we not get that whole value out of doing it because we haven't necessarily asked for or taken into account that we should ask for, or get a CAD resource to create that content that actually takes it from being, okay, this is objects going in a certain order, to this is what the construction site's going to look like throughout that construction process.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody got any other thoughts? Peter, were you going to say?
Yeah, I just remember what I was going to say earlier. And just on that key point there, if you're doing shutdowns and bits and pieces and things like that, and we have a lot of this with possessions and that, something we're starting to look into more and things is more also the lighting situation. Again, if it's nighttime, and bring in a little bit of the virtual reality type Simon, where you can simulate the day and night and have your, you know, the right lux levels of lights and things. Again, things like that we're starting to look into, because possession, you could 4D sequence the heck out of a possession, but when you're stood there in the middle of the night and it's raining, you know, that completely throws a different ball game in, and starting to simulate some of that in another dimension, as well as actually what are we going to build and when are we going to build it. So yeah, there's a lot of tools you can use around that, and some relatively cheap tools coming on the market now as well. You know, don't have to be the real complicated expensive stuff. Going back to the podcast, just do something.
Yeah. Okay, James, you got anything to add?
Just saying the same thing as Stacey about the linear project. Can you still see what's on my screen?
Yes.
So this is, so Stacey, yeah, 20 kilometers. That is a 20-kilometer electrification project. 2,000 activities assigned to it, and exactly as you're saying, Stacey, you can't see the small works when you're looking at the whole thing, but you can use representations over it. So you can break out areas. You can then zoom in on the model if it's built like this and look at clashes and see the works in detail. So it's to questions like that, 4D always applies. It's always useful. It's just getting the right setup. So and
yeah, it's kind of like what we usually have in cabins, where you have the schematic, the linear schematic on the wall, and post-it notes underneath it. It's that in a computerized version.
So what's on screen here is very hard to read. For the team, it was something they could read, and this was possessions and clashes and RRVs and engineering. And it's, Chris, it's like the questions yesterday about, does 4D, does it apply to hydro projects? Does it apply to wind farms? Does it apply to high-rise residential, tunneling? It pretty much applies to anything that's constructed and assembled.
Anyway, you've got to plan something.
Yeah.
You just have to change what the visuals look like. That's the only difference, isn't it?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if it's Excel or VR or heavy data. It's just
time change diagrams. They're all relevant. All relevant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So to sum up, I think we've pretty much done all the questions now. I want to just pick up on something you mentioned earlier. I can't remember if it was yourself, Peter, or James. It might have even been Chris. DJ had developed some metrics that said between 1 to 5% improvement for a small outlay of cost of, did you say 0.025%?
He stated this. He said he wouldn't stand up against it. He stated,
okay, right. Well, maybe we can help him qualify it, because I think that's really powerful stuff. If we can, demonstrate that, then that, you're on a winner. And we're on a winner anyway. But people in our industry are hugely skeptical about, how much is it going to cost and what are you going to get? And if we can prove it with stuff like this, and to me, I'm a construction person anyway, but and I'm convinced right from the start, always have been, with applying tech in the right places. But to take it forwards and prove it, stuff like that is really powerful. And I'd like to work with you on that, and maybe move it forwards and convince other people that this is what they should be doing. But having said that, there was looking at the poll questions. There's quite a few. There's over 50% using the tech now, which is great. We've got a huge opportunity with the other 48%. So great opportunity. I was just going to finish off with the rest of the slides that I've got on the COMIT session, unless there's anything else you want to add in before I just take control back and show the rest of the slides. I mean, what I will say is it's been a great session. We've got quite a lot of participation, some great questions. The format today, James, all credit to you, was great. So yeah, fabulous. What I will also add as well, we record the session and we will share that through the COMIT website for later reuse. So if anybody wants to tune in or missed a few of those golden nuggets today, then great. So let me just share with you the rest of these slides, and if there are any more questions, just fire them in. I mean, we're not finished yet. We've still got another 5 minutes or more. I'll just take it back if I can, and move on. So move on to the next. I want to say thank you very much to everybody, led by yourself, James, today. We have another session next on the 16th of October, and that is materials management software supporting digital foreman. That's quite a good one. Same time on that particular date. I mentioned about our sponsors. Thanks again to O2 and O2 Business and Rebim. Question I get every time, and I always mention this because it comes in regardless. Yes, we do record, and they are available through the COMIT website. You should get an email, and there should be a link in that as well. That usually comes out 3 days afterwards. So that's pretty much it. James, I'm going to lay it open to you to give a parting word or two, if you want to, and maybe anybody else can jump in. The floor's open. Anything you've got to you want to add to? What's already been said?
Just to say thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. Yeah, it's been really good. I'm sorry if we kind of rambled off a little bit. We do it.
Not at all. Not at all. It was fantastic. It was all to queue. All to queue. I don't know whether you want to mention your you've got a conference. You want to mention that? Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if it's possible to share that with everyone anyway as well. That's on our website, which is www.4d.construction.
Yeah.
And on there, the registration and everything.
Well, so, we can the send out that goes next week. We can share that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone on?
No, nothing from me. Thanks for having us.
yeah, and absolutely. I mean, it's been great having you all on. Thanks for the lead in, the discussions we've had. I know we've had quite a few, but a brilliant session. And again, it fits. You know what you guys are doing fits very nicely in with the productivity initiative that COMIT's driving. Any little bit, any incremental change or incremental improvement is worthy. You know, as the famous supermarket says, every little helps. Yeah. So with that, we'll wish everybody a great weekend and hopefully see you on the next session, or some of you. But thanks again. Brilliant. Round of applause. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.